Welcome everyone to another episode of WA This Week. And look, again, we're live today. So if you have any questions, then please make sure you send those in and I'll do my best to answer those at the end of just a brief presentation on a couple of issues. Again, look, action-packed. We've had all of the drama of the voice referendum and then the fallout of that and all of the claims by the left that apparently it was a victory for them and, trying to rewrite history on all of that. But look, I'm not going to cover that this week. I think there's been plenty of discussion on that. I want to cover a couple of local issues and key issues. Look, first of all, I do want to congratulate my colleague, the Honourable Peter Collier, for the good work he's doing in holding the state government to account on the absolute debacle around Banksia Hill and then just the horror of this young boy committing suicide and ultimately dying, or trying to commit suicide and then ultimately dying from his injuries. A young boy that was being held in Unit 18 at Casuarina Prison, at the adult jail. Now, look, I understand that there can be a need for detention of youth, and we shouldn't be too pious about all of this. Whilst there are, these are young people, some of them commit really egregious crimes and can be very difficult to manage, but they're youth. And we all know that young people, all of us, I know in my youth I did foolish things and hopefully, none of it should have come under the purvey of the law, but nevertheless, equally young people do get themselves involved in activity. And of course, in the case of the children at Banksia Hill, many of those children effectively haven't been parented in their lives, come from highly dysfunctional, traumatised backgrounds. The aim is, with youth, to try and rehabilitate them. Now, we understand from media reports that this young boy was being held in his prison cell in an adult prison 23 out of 24 hours a day, day after day. That's inhuman. And as I say, I'm not pie-eyed on this one. I don't pretend that, these cases are all trivial and just with a bit of love and care that somehow or other the situation for that young boy could have been turned around. Nevertheless, with the appropriate trained specialist care in a facility built for youth, you'd have to think that there's a much greater chance of rehabilitation for that young man instead of him being put into the situation he was in. And it reflects the failure of this state government. We've heard every credible agency that has anything to do with youth, the current Commissioner for Children, the former Commissioner, all of them have said that it's untenable to hold those children in that adult jail and they must be accommodated in Banksia Hill in an appropriate setting and with appropriate security. And that hasn't happened. I think that it reflects a failure of this government in law and order overall. I'm not going to go down a detailed path on law and order, but if you look at any major criminal area of criminal activity, they've all got materially worse under this Labor government. And the great tragedy here is that this young man is effectively taken his own life. He's ultimately died of injuries from a suicide attempt. And, heartbreaking that that young life has been ended and hasn't been turned around. And as I say, I congratulate my colleague, Peter Collier, for the good work that he's doing, pursuing the government on this. And this isn't some new thing. He's had experience in this as a minister and, in a previous coalition government, and knows the issues and knows that things can be done differently. And this government is simply failing to do that. Another area, you look at the key areas that government needs to manage. If you look at the assessment of government, it's in the areas of health, law and order, and education. Let's look at education. We have a situation now where we have, a good number of schools, we've got teachers out there who haven't even finished their qualifications, haven't even completed their training. Now, it doesn't mean they're not good people. I have great respect for the teachers in our education system. But just imagine them being thrown in the deep end having to take classrooms full of students when they haven't even been able to complete their training. There are two aspects to this. I'm certain it must be distressing for a good number of those young teachers going out when they don't, they're not fully prepared for the work that they're having to do. But equally for those students, it can't be good for the students being put in that situation as well. And I'll reflect on the previous coalition government. Under the Barnett-led coalition government, over the 8 years, in every single year, every single child who went to a government school had a fully qualified teacher at the front of the classroom at the start of the year. Now, you might think, so what? Well, so what is that during that time, the state's population increased by around 500,000 people. Vastly more people that are coming into the state at the moment over that period of time. And yet, despite that, and despite all of the challenges that presented, including building a raft of new schools to cope with that massive increase in population, every single classroom had a fully qualified teacher in front of them at the start of the year and obviously through the year as well. Under this Cook Labor government, simply failing to do that, they're pretending that, they've got this under control by putting out those partially trained teachers before they've completed all of their training in those classrooms. It's an absolute failure, and it's a failure of government that they haven't been able to do that. And we see this shortage right across the public sector. I might say despite, we'll talk about this at some stage, massive increase in the public service under the Cook Labor government. So they've massively increased the public service, really dramatically. And can I say they've played this little trick of saying that they're not increasing salaries and they were being prudent. But what they did was they increased all of the job grades. So we saw a massive increase in the bill for public servants, and yet they are completely unable to provide one of the key critical parameters for government, or the key critical services for government, and that is fully trained teachers in front of all the classrooms. So that is a major fail. What do we see in regional areas? Utterly inadequate housing. When we see this government completely fail to maintain government housing in regional areas and to provide sufficient government housing. So you've got teachers going to these areas, they're living in caravans and caravan parks. Just imagine you're a teacher gone out and you're trying to present yourself in a professional way, but day in, day out, you're having to get ready, from a caravan park. It's a complete failure on this government's part. And you can sort of see there's building a bit of a theme here in terms of this government. And that is, we've got a government that is failing on all of the major things it needs to do, whether it's health, whether it's law and order, whether it's education. In every case, tell me what's improved under this McGowan and then Cook Labor government, because I think you'll be struggling for a long time to tell me anything. It's a hallmark of the government. They are brilliant on spin. I've said this many times. Boy, they can tell a tale. If they were making, if telling tall stories was going to help the people of the state, we'd be in good fettle. But they're great at spinning a tale, not so good at delivering the critical services. And I'll get on to health. Some of you may have seen, and I think this is something for everyone to take a keen interest in, is the government's captain's call on location of the Women and Babies Hospital to Murdoch University, so King Edward Memorial Hospital. It's an old building. I've said in other forums, I'm not so sure that building couldn't have been maintained. But in any case, the decision has been made that hospital has to be moved. Now, at the moment, the King Edward Memorial Hospital is only a few minutes from the Perth Children's Hospital. And what does that mean? What it means is that when there are serious issues with the mother, and in particular when there are serious issues with newborn babies, they're only a few minutes away from the top experts who can carry out the very complex surgery and medical intervention that in particular those little babies need to live. Now, the previous government made a decision that should be co-located, the new Women and Babies Hospital should be co-located with the Children's Hospital. Why? Because that's where the expert paediatric surgeons are. And paediatric surgeons don't grow on trees. Paediatric surgeons require decades of detailed training to do these very complex surgeries. There are only a handful of them in Australia, and there are only a small number in Western Australia. What has this Cook Labor government done? They made a captain's call to relocate the new Women and Babies Hospital at Fiona Stanley on the Murdoch campus. What that means is tragically that there is a very high probability that newborn babies will die because they will not be able to get the required medical surgery, the intervention they need in time, because all of the key specialists are at the Perth Children's Hospital and the Queen Elizabeth II site. And if there are seriously ill children, they'll need to be transported by ambulance across the bridge all the way through to the Nedlands campus to be treated. And I'm sure many of you would know, seconds count, let alone minutes, let alone the 15 to 30 minutes. I mean, it's 15 minutes if there's no traffic. It's half an hour or more. Many of you would know who try and get across that bridge every morning. When you've got the place absolutely gridlocked, how are you going to get babies across to those hospitals? And it's not as if you can have a helicopter on standby at the hospital. I mean, to mobilise a helicopter takes considerable time, an hour or some such thing. So that's what it's going to mean. And the basis they've used for justifying that is absolutely pathetic. It is purely a captain's call. But what we've seen with this Cook Labor government is they just set their jaw. So they come out, they make a decision based on nothing. Then they try and subsequently justify it. And that's what they've done here. They've gone through this really tawdry exercise trying to justify the decision to locate the new Women and Babies Hospital out at the Murdoch campus. And then they just set their jaw and say, well, that's what we're doing. And they just keep quoting utter nonsense to justify it. And look, I don't have time in this forum. I'll put some stuff online actually on this because I've gone through it in some detail in Parliament along with my colleagues to outline just how appalling this decision is in terms of consequences. It was interesting. They had a group called Infrastructure WA, which is a body set up by the state government apparently to look at infrastructure projects and provide some objective analysis of it. And the infrastructure WA went through, and this was post the decision being made, so government tried to justify what they'd done. Post the decision being made, Infrastructure WA went through the exercise, and I'll just tell you how flimsy that exercise was with one example. They said, we're looking at all the different aspects, but we'll ignore the clinical aspects. Well, isn't that fascinating? Just imagine, it's a hospital. You'd reckon that the clinical aspects would be at the top of the list, wouldn't you? That's what I'd reckon. This is like some tragic, reflection of the episode in Yes Minister. And some of your students of Yes Minister would remember that there was the hospital in England that won the best hospital of the year, but they had no patients. And that is the same thinking behind this. Imagine saying, I'm doing an analysis of the best two options. I'll just ignore the clinical outcomes. And what we've seen is clinicians, there are, when you're in your office and you're just a, humble member of the opposition, you get a bit of correspondence now and then. When this decision was announced initially, my office was inundated with correspondence from clinicians saying this is a fatal decision. And that is, you will cost children's lives if you allow this to go ahead. And that's one of the reasons I've been keen to advocate, along with my colleagues, on this particular topic. But, now we've had 3 different major clinical groups come out. These are the clinical experts that deal with babies and have come out and said, this is an utterly foolhardy decision on the government's part. You must co-locate this Women and Babies Hospital with the Perth Children's Hospital on the QE2 site. And yet the government still set its jaw, still saying that it won't do it. I do not know what is motivating them. I have a suspicion of what's motivating them. It's nothing to do with clinical outcomes. Nevertheless, they are setting their jaw on this. They need to stop. Minister Cook he's still relatively new in his role as Premier. He needs to make another captain's call, and that is do what's right for the women and babies. not what's right for some other third-party interest. And he needs to get them to come back and reverse that decision. The arguments that have been used against the location of the QE2 site are just absolute nonsense. And as I say, I don't have time to go through them, but it is an appallingly bad decision that will cost the lives of children. And that is an enormous tragedy for parents in the state of Western Australia. Just a couple of, really only one other topic, but this was just topical today. I see in the Western Australia, they've reported that Premier Cook has written a letter to the federal government effectively saying they should have a look at the new IR laws or question, whether they're going to have an unnecessary impact on industry. Now, 2 weeks ago, I asked Premier Cook a question in Parliament on this. These new federal IR laws are not some benign tweaking. They are a profound change. And I won't go through all of that because you can read about it, I guess, if you want to. But there's no doubt whatsoever it's going to have a major impact on our resources sector. I think not all of our big miners will be hit by it. Look, I've said before, the big companies, they're pretty good at taking care of themselves, so they can prosecute their own arguments. But all of those contractors, all small business, I've spoken to a lot of small business, they are really, really concerned about this. It's a bad law. Bad law is when you make criminals of good people trying to do the right thing. And that's what this new federal IR law will do in relation particularly to small and medium-sized business, outside of affecting the business, the ability of businesses to be competitive and to compete for the best people for certain positions. But look, I asked Premier Cook then whether he'd write a letter to the federal government, and he gave some sort of waffly, put off answer. No, didn't have to do that and so on. Look, I'm glad he's seen sense. It's always good when someone does that. I'm glad he's written to the federal government on that. And I hope he's more strident than in what is indicated in the media in terms of what is prosecuting an argument for Western Australia, because it'll hit us more than anyone else, and particularly in that resources area. But, why did it take so long? This was a no-brainer. And I might say, and I won't go into it in detail at all here, but exactly the same with the federal court decision, which has stopped effectively, put a major roadblock in the way of Woodside Scarborough Gas Project. And boy, let me tell you, if that Woodside Scarborough Gas Project does not go ahead on schedule, everyone in Western Australia is going to feel the impact of that, because they are critical to our gas supply, and gas is critical to our electricity supply in the state. And of course, that gas supply is critical to our major overseas customers, in particular Japan and South Korea. So I hope the Premier gets his pen out and gets his pad out and writes another letter to the Prime Minister on that. Look, I'm going to finish there. If you've got any questions, if there are any questions there, I'm really happy to answer questions. And otherwise, thank you very much for watching.
Few questions today. This is more of a comment. As a Liberal member, I'm insulted that you're going to give the maths seat to all.
Well, I'm not giving any seats to anyone in Parliament. Hopefully, I'm keeping my own. But we'll go through all of that competitive process in a while. I'm not aware that anyone is suggesting that, and I think there's still some significant water to go under the bridge. Obviously, and I don't think this is not revealing anything, and that is the Liberal and National Party are obviously in discussions about what arrangements they'll have going into the next state election. We've always worked closely with the National Party. When we've been in government, it's always been a coalition. So we'll have to work out some sort of arrangement, but look, what those final arrangements are going to be, time will tell.
Unit 18 needs to go. That's what Peter Collier wants. How are you meant to rehabilitate people when they're in confinement 24/7?
Yeah, look, I absolutely agree. As I say, and it's clear that these kids aren't just sort of ordinary, kids out of ordinary houses. Typically, they're kids that have had real issues in their lives, but there can be some enormous behavioural issues that can be dangerous to people, dangerous to the guards in the prisons and so on. So there needs to be an adequate setting. But I mean, gosh, I don't care who it is, whether it's a child or an adult. I mean, you're putting people in solitary confinement effectively, 24, or 23 out of 24 hours a day. How is that person ever going to change? How can that person possibly maintain, in this case, a child who is traumatised in any case, how can they possibly maintain good mental health? Any of us, if any of us were put in that situation, I don't know how we would cope. And as I say, you've got children that have come from already traumatised backgrounds in that situation. I know it's not simple. I know it's not trivial, but it is, inhuman, I think, to do that. Those children, yes, it's going to take a lot of resources. Yes, it's going to take a lot of effort. And for some of those children, it's going to take a lot more resources than for others. But that's what you do. Look, these kids are under the state's care. And boy, how wonderful if what you do can actually turn these kids around and give them happy, useful lives. And again, I'm not some sort of pie-eyed optimist. I know that's not trivial, but you give it every shot. But locking a kid up 23 hours, 24 hours of the day, that ain't giving it every shot. That is just treating a child in an inhuman way. It's wrong. It shouldn't be done.
Where do you stand on the new firearms law?
Look, it's interesting with the new firearm law. Some of you may know, I grew up on a farm. I think I think there's a balance here. I'll tell you, in terms of some of you may have seen the detail of the bill, but what they're effectively saying is that for ordinary gun owners, they could have no more than 5 more weapons. For farmers, they can have more than that. I'll tell you, for all the farmers I knew, they didn't have more than 2 or 3 weapons. I'll tell you, for us on the farm, we had a 22 and a 22 Magnum, which we used for vermin control, for killing stock and distressed stock and things like that, which you have to do on the farm. Most farms, they'd have something like a 22, a shotgun, back in the good old days, it was a 303, or they have a 243 or something like that, one of those more high-powered weapons, but don't need much more than that. I know on some stations where they've got large stations, covering millions of acres, they've got a lot of people working on the stations. They have to deal with camels and, wild dogs and other vermin, as well as, stock where it's traumatic and you have to dispatch animals. They might need more animals. I don't actually think the restrictions will make much difference. Now, there is one group, there are a couple of groups that can be affected. So people who are members of gun clubs and gun owners, I know, and particularly people who are into competitive shooting, that, some competitive shooters, as I understand it, they may have up to 20 weapons. That's a particular case. Look, I think the legislation does have some capacity there for the discretion to be exercised in those particular cases. I'll be going through this bill in detail next week. We've got a week off from Parliament, so I'll be getting ready for the Parliament coming back, and that's one of the bills we'll probably end up debating. So I'll go through that in detail. So I don't think that this bill is going to have a big impact on the great majority of farmers, or in fact the greater majority of recreational shooters. Look, this banning of the very high caliber weapons, talk about a farce. I've said Minister Papalea, he makes these great announcements and he loves to get out there with a policeman and a pile of weapons and say how they're stopping crime, and we all know that this has virtually no impact on crime at all. They had this great thing a while ago where they're going to ban high-powered weapons, and they're going to ban 50 cal, 50 cal rifles. Well, apparently there are 3 in the state, so not a big pool for the criminals to dip from, and police knew where they were. Do you know what they had to do for their photo shoot? They went and bought a 50 cal. They contributed a 30% increase in the stock of 50 cals in the state by going out and buying a 50 cal for their photo shoot. What a joke. And that, what would a minister do that? It just makes a farce of what he's trying to do. Look, I am, with guns, I think, there's a reasonable argument to say that you need to have adequate gun control. Does this law go too far? At first look, I'll be direct with you. I think it's probably not going to have the impact that people fear. But the devil's always in the detail. I know with these issues, there'll always be circumstances that are unfair. So certainly I'll be looking at that in relation to that particular aspect of saying whether it's unfair. There are some things that happen that really shouldn't. One of the things that the gun shop owners were doing was a gun shop owner would go out and buy some farm out in some far distant location that was quite cheap, that covered a certain area. And some of you may know you can't own a weapon, above it. Well, you can't own a weapon at all unless you've got a place to use it. So if you don't own a property that's of a suitable size, you have to have a permission letter from a property owner to say that you'll use the weapon on that site. But some of these gun shops were actually selling these permission letters based on the property they'd bought somewhere. They were selling them for, say, $200 a piece to thousands of people. And people who probably didn't have a good reason for owning a gun at all, and a lot of very young people who've never had any experience with guns or farms or stock of the like, and aren't members of clubs and so on. Look, I think that was wrong. Equally, where there are legitimate permission letters and people are getting. The other thing is there's some administrative detail in this bill, which in terms of will it make it far too onerous for gun owners? Gun owners shouldn't be punished. There's nothing, there's nothing immoral about owning a gun. There's nothing improper about owning a gun. And many people own guns and do that for legitimate purposes. So what we don't want to see is a sort of a process where the administrative processes are so onerous that effectively you're punishing people for owning guns. I don't agree with that at all. You shouldn't punish gun owners where they've got them for legitimate purposes, and I'll be making sure that this bill doesn't cross that line.
Who is your shadow education minister, may I ask?
So our shadow is Donna Farragut, the Honourable Donna Farragut. And can I tell you what an excellent, this is in the Liberal Party, she's our spokesperson, and Peter Rundle is the opposition shadow minister for education. Both excellent people. Look, I'll talk about Donna because she's in the Liberal Party and she's our spokesperson for this area. And I know that can be a little bit confusing, spokesperson, shadow, but look, we are two separate parties, so, we cover portfolios ourselves as well. But she's an outstanding individual, Donna, just very impressive, got a huge background in this area, can I say, particularly for, and especially, I might say, around younger people, so does a great job.
Thoughts on country roads not getting fixed?
Yeah, look, it's on. I think I might have spoken about this before, but, I come from the bush, a little town called Cranbrook, or I grew up in a farm out west of there, and we've still got that, fortunately, in the family, so that's a real privilege to be able to go down there and remember my youth. But I go down the Albany Highway. I felt Prado, so I can sort of get along okay. I did, when I was a boy, I had a little minivan that I used to get around in. I would just be terrified driving down the Albany Highway now. It is unbelievable. The state of the roads is just, the state of that one is just appalling. Massive great scallops, huge lips where the bitumen's been pushed out. I'm not kidding. I'm talking about differences in road height of up to half a metre. And this is on a major highway, and I might say much of that damage is on construction that's been carried out in the last 2, 3, 4 years. There appears to have been some massive degradation in the standard of the road construction. But wherever I go, I see the same thing going out. I was out, went out to the Weedbelt a few weeks ago to go to a country show. Same sort of deal there with the roads. I'm appalled. Western Australia is the wealthiest state in Australia. We account for half of Australia's export income, and a good deal of that income depends on those roads to the regional areas, whether it's out to the mining areas or the agricultural area. I think we've got the worst roads in Australia. I think I'd say that the Great Eastern Highway, that's an appalling road. And imagine that, boy, a fair percentage of the state's wealth depends on that road, and the fair percentage of Australia's wealth depends on that road, and yet it's in an absolutely appalling condition. I didn't know what's gone on with main roads, but and we have the state, this Cook Labor government, they boast about their road spending. The state of our roads is appalling, and it needs a real focus.
A couple of comments on your response on the firearm issue. My 30-year-old sister was a farmer and unavailed herself with her own gun. Important conversation. And the detail needs to be set before the final vote, honest and upfront as regards to firearms.
Yeah, look, the devil's always in the detail. It's one of my frustrations, can I say, in Parliament. You'd be surprised how many ministers don't read the bills they're presenting to Parliament. Now, I don't know whether Minister Papalier has read his bill or not. Hopefully he has. But a lot of ministers clearly don't, because when you ask them questions, they don't know what they're talking about. But the devil is always in the detail. And it's the big fear is the unintended consequences. Look, laws that make criminals of good people are bad laws. So we don't want to see that happen to others. As I say, there are good reasons why many people own guns, and they shouldn't be punished or treated unfairly because of it.
Do you invest in DLT technology?
Well, I don't know what that is, so I don't think so. Look, I'm not one of the things coming in part. I've been very shy on investing on anything. Not that I was ever a great investor, but I think when you come into Parliament, you don't. If you mean in terms of buying shares, but look, whether I bought it or not, I'm not sure. So perhaps someone could enlighten me on that one.
Yes. How come Woolworths in the airport can trade later, but not in normal suburban areas?
Yeah, look, it's pretty straightforward. It's a Commonwealth. That land is Commonwealth land, so it's controlled by the Commonwealth. So that's why you've seen a number of different operations move onto that land. Sort of a bit of a rotten ways that can happen, but nevertheless, that can happen. I can tell you, I haven't been out to any of the stores out of the airport. I go out there to pick up my kids or, catch a taxi out there to travel myself occasionally, but I'm not sure how many people are going to travel out there to avail themselves of that, but that's why it's Commonwealth land, so it's Commonwealth laws, not state laws.
How can Australia address productivity challenges?
Yeah, it's a huge challenge, and you've probably seen this issue of productivity declining. I'll go down a little sort of niche avenue on this one. I mean, part of it is that we're going through this so-called green revolution at the moment, the transition to net zero. All of that capital investment is going to result in zero or even negative productivity. And the history of the world and the history of Australia is that you invest capital to improve productivity. And at the moment, we're going through an exercise where we're investing an enormous amount of capital, but we're only replacing what is already there, in that we're just transitioning. We're not putting in an improved energy supply or more energy. We're just replacing what is already there. Well, that's why there's a zero productivity gain. And in fact, it could well be a negative productivity gain because there are all sorts of cost issues with that transition. So that's a huge problem facing us. And I don't have time to go through here, but if you look at the magnitude of the capital investment that's required for that transition, it is utterly eye-watering. And I'm not talking about an estimate made up by someone who hates the idea. I'm talking about capital estimates made up by people who are fervent proponents of that transition. So that's a real challenge for Australia. As we invest more and more and more money in that energy transition, it's going to make it harder and harder. In fact, that will by itself drive productivity in Australia. Now, otherwise, the firms, why don't firms invest in improving productivity and efficiency of their businesses? Because they're not confident in the future. And I might say, when you've got a Cook Labor government in Western Australia and you've got the absolute left-wing Fruit Loop Albanese Labor government in Canberra, a lot of businesses in Australia are going, I'm not so sure about the future. And they're just biding their time in terms of making major capital investments. So it's a real concern. It's why confidence, you might read in the paper, you talk about business confidence, and you think, oh, well, who cares about business confidence? Business confidence impacts all of us because business has to be confident in the future. Imagine you're a major gas producer and you're looking at investing many, many billions of dollars in a new gas project, and then you have the federal court come in and overturn your government approvals for that project on what are ludicrously flimsy sort of basis, if you like. I know that decision that I'm referring to, the overturning of SEMA's approval of the seismic work for the Scarborough gas project, that is having major reverberations all around the resource sector across Australia, and that's harming confidence, and that's harming investment to improve productivity. So you've got to have confidence in the future to make these investments to improve productivity around the country.
We have two questions kind of on opposing sides, so I'll just ask the two at the same time.
Yeah, sure.
So on one platform, we have allowing Woolworths to operate longer hours will destroy local grocers. And on Facebook, we have we need to change the laws on trading hours.
Yeah, look, it's a mixed issue. I'll tell you that I think I'm always honest, and I try and be as direct as possible on any particular subject. I think that trading hours is a balanced issue. To be frank, we're spoiled for choice in terms of shopping. I really like those community grocery shops, and I've met with the people from the various areas. I'm Cottesloe, I guess maybe in the area around me, we may be blessed with this, but we've got a real wide choice of independent grocers, and they provide a fantastic service. I will say, if I were to compare what do those big supermarkets put back into the community, the big corporates versus our local independent grocers, those local independent grocers are just fantastic. They support the local schools. I go down every so often, I'll be running a bit of a thing to try and get donations for food charities and things like that. They just always say, yeah, no worries, and they help you, and they put stuff in it themselves, and they are fabulous employers. Look, I haven't got any stats in front of me, but my sort of rough guess would be that per item sold, those small independent grocers would probably employ 2 or 3 times as many people per item sold compared to the big supermarkets. And the Coles that I visit down in Claremont Quarter, I doggedly go to the checkout with a human on it because I want to give someone a job. But you know what? Most of the shoppers there are going through a machine. They don't even see a person. So they do their shopping and they go to a machine. They've had a massive reduction in local employment there. How does that help us? And I haven't seen the grocery prices come down, can I tell you? In fact, I'll also say that more often than not, the independent grocers are cheaper than the major supermarkets as well, just because they're major. They're duopolies. I mean, Woolworths and Coles, that's a duopoly. For any of you who've done your high school economics or better, they control the market, and they can and do charge what they like. They might have the occasional special, but boy, prices have gone up and up. You know that when you go to do your shopping. So, look, I'm not a sort of a laissez-faire or open slather, just let the big supermarkets wipe out all the independent grocers. It's a balance. Look, I do the weekly shop at our house. It's a big shop, so I'm not just sort of theoretical here in terms of having to get things done. I've never had any trouble, getting to the big supermarkets when I need to, and equally, I like to support the smaller grocers, the smaller independent shops when I can as well. And I think the balance is probably about right. I know people think different, but I would just honestly, my community would be worse if we lost those smaller independent grocery shops.
All right. Well, we'll close off on an uncontroversial question, which is, do you support fracking and nuclear energy?
Look, well, like all things, I try and do things based on science and common sense. Look, in both cases, one of the things, we're blessed in Australia, I might have a poke every now and then about things that are going on, but we have an outstanding regulatory framework. I'll tell you, for the people who are opponents to fracking, if you are, well, you pretty well would say, if you're not going to have any fracturing of rocks in terms of for gas and oil recovery, then you would shut down every gas well and every oil well in Australia because, in fact, all of them require some level of modification to get adequate flows of material out of those wells. Done responsibly, which it is done in Australia, I've got no issue with fracking. It needs to be done properly and responsibly. It is done. It is in Australia, and I think that's well regulated. And what was the second one? I got so excited about fracking.
Nuclear.
Oh, nuclear energy. Look, nuclear energy. I'm fine with nuclear energy. It's nuclear energy, and again, we've got an excellent regulatory framework. It's safe. My issue with nuclear is I get a lot of solicitations from people like, oh, no, but we've got to be gangbusters on nuclear energy. That's the solution to every problem. It isn't. Nuclear energy is not cheap. It suffers from all of the disadvantages in terms of coal, in terms of intermittency. With nuclear power stations, you turn them on, you run them flat out, and you don't want to have your power going up and down. So if you're using it, to try and use a nuclear power station to sort of back up intermittent renewables, that doesn't work so well. Look, on the East Coast, where 60% of their energy comes from coal, I think there could be a place for nuclear power stations. In Western Australia, I don't think that's going to be the answer here in the near future. Look, and everyone gets the same stuff online. People get very excited about small modular reactors, and the concept sounds very exciting. None exist. There's one being built they've got a project starting in Canada to try and build one. The thing about small modular reactors are, they're not one thing. I looked at a paper recently, so I do look and study at these things, and there are something like 18 different designs. None of them have actually been built. Some look technically feasible, some are just pie in the sky, they'll never happen. But the truth is, we're probably at least a decade away or more from being able to reliably sort of go, if you like, pluck off the shelf a small modular reactor. And it's probably more than a decade away. So it's not going to help us in the short term. I wouldn't dismiss it as I'm technologically agnostic. And for those people that want to get rid of, carbon emissions from hydrocarbon sources, then nuclear is one of the options you could use. So you should look at it. But I think people need to be realistic. It's not available now, particularly the small modular reactors. And in Western Australia, it probably won't make economic sense. On the East Coast, in New South Wales and Victoria, it could make economic sense. Then you've got the big barrier, and that is you can be as excited about it as you like. If the community don't accept it, then it isn't going to happen. And so I think there's been a step, there's been some changes in communities' view on it. I think a lot of people now are saying, yeah, we don't mind nuclear so much. When the question is, do you want it in your town? Do you want it near your farm? And so on. People's attitudes sort of go a bit back to the not so sure. So I think there's still a way to go to get community acceptance as well. But clearly the debate's alive, and clearly community attitudes are changing.
All right, that's the end of it.
Thank you very much, everyone. Well, look, thanks very much for listening.